Before, I used to watch the students when they made stuff in my classroom. They made a drum or they made moccasins or they made cement. They would hide them. But today, about 3 months ago, in November, I seen 3 of my kids that made drums. They were so happy they walked down the hall and they're telling their friends, hey, look what I made. And they were all drumming together. Now that's the shift that I'm talking about, that they are proud of their identity.
You're listening to Let's Imagine, an Imagine Canada podcast for everyone interested in social issues and the nonprofit sector. Each episode, join us as we talk with leaders and innovators about building our collective power to drive lasting change in communities across Canada and around the globe. A special thank you to our supporting partner, Carter's Professional Corporation, for making our podcast possible. Together, let's imagine a stronger future. Welcome to Let's Imagine. I'm your host, Bruce MacDonald. Across Canada, communities and nonprofit leaders are looking to create innovative solutions that address complex issues. As a sector, we are constantly hearing about the challenges of our work and how difficult it can be to really act and work differently. On Let's Imagine, we are so fortunate to have the opportunity to highlight and profile different ways of working. Connected North is one such innovative approach. Launched with the support of Cisco Systems and now operated by TakingITGlobal, it uses interactive video technology to connect northern classrooms with scientists, artists, elders, and other experts, built on strong partnerships with educators and communities. By working in a fundamentally different way, Connected North was designed to address some of the unique challenges of working in the North, things like distance and the lack of digital infrastructure. In the past, these have made access to equitable education harder to achieve. Today, we'll explore Connected North as an example of innovative community partnership in action, what it takes to build trust, stay community informed, and deliver real value for students and teachers. Joining me are Willa Black, who founded the program while at Cisco with guidance from Mary Simon, who at the time led ITK, the Inuit Peoples Organization of Canada, and now serves as the volunteer chair of Connected North's advisory board. And Paul Boucher, a member of the Rocher River people, who was displaced and relocated in the 1960s, a residential school survivor, and a language and cultural specialist at Paul William Kaeser High School in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, as well as a knowledge and language keeper. Welcome to Let's Imagine, Paul and Willa.
Thank you so much, Bruce, for having us. It's a great pleasure and great to see Paul, as always.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
So am I. So we're going to start with a question for you, Willa. For listeners who are new to it, what is Connected North and what need was it originally created to address?
So Connected North was actually born in the private sector, which makes it a little unusual from the get-go. And it began in 2010. I was leading the marketing practice at Cisco Canada and decided that I wanted to shift gears a little bit and incorporate a social impact practice. So Cisco, for those who don't know, is the worldwide leader in internet-based technologies. So we provide collaboration technologies, video technologies, interactive video technologies, anything that really makes the internet come to life, all the infrastructure, hardware and software. And we didn't actually have a social impact program to speak of. And we wanted to figure out a way we could leverage our technologies to address a social issue in this country, to make a difference, to lead transformation. And we went on a 2-year discovery process. And through that process, as you mentioned, Bruce, I met Mary Simon, who at the time was leader of Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami. And I said, if we were to provide technology to your communities, what sort of improvements could we make? How could we partner with you to support the development, the social and economic development of your communities? And she said, you know what? You need to come here. You know, before we do anything, you need to see it for yourself. And Bruce, I went up to Nunavut and visited the Esquarnate Middle School. This is around 2011. And I was absolutely shocked at the lack of resources, at some of the social challenges they were dealing with in the school, the low levels of graduation rates, the fact that at the time, about 70% of students were dropping out of school at grade 9, and also appalled at the fact that Nunavut had the highest youth suicide rate per capita globally. And these challenges were compounded by the fact that they were just so darn far away. And so I showcased telepresence technology. And I said, look, we can put screens into your classroom and we can use interactive technology to bring people life size in high definition to provide mental health supports, virtual field trips, teacher supports, literacy, STEM, arts and culture, Indigenous language, teachings, Indigenous mentorship. And she said, you know what? I'm all in. Anything that makes these classrooms more fun, I'm all for it. We need that student engagement. And so we started a pilot working with the University of Ottawa where we got a researcher involved and she connected to the schools over video and she totally got into the spirit of the program and she did lab experiments and things that fizzled and sizzled and boiled and exploded and the kids had never seen anything like that in real time and they were hooked. And the teachers were hooked. And the demand started growing quickly. And there were two of us at Cisco when we added things like mentorship and virtual field trips to museums and aquariums and literacy supports and cultural storytelling, Indigenous storytelling. And before you knew it, we had 8 schools and the demand was so great that I went to my boss at Cisco and I said, you know what? We've incubated something that could make a meaningful difference in education in the North, and this needs to scale. So this cannot stay at Cisco because we're going to need partners to be able to do it. And no one is going to fund Cisco to do this work. So we need to create an ecosystem of partners and it needs to thrive. And so as you mentioned, Bruce, we moved it in 2014 over to the good folks, Michael Furtick and Jennifer Corriero at TakingITGlobal. And we have created this unbelievable ecosystem of governments, corporate leaders, private and public foundations, individual donors, First Nations education authorities across the country, governments, and it goes on and on and on. And I'm so proud to say that today the Connected North program operates in 221 schools all across the North, serving over 37,000 students and 1,800 teachers. And teachers can order one of 2,800 different virtual sessions to bring the world to the doorsteps of kids in these communities like Paul's.
It's so great to get the perspective on how it was constructed. And I think one of the great things about Paul having you here is getting the perspective of how it works in the classroom. So Paul, from your perspective, what does access to programs like Connected North look like from inside the classroom? And what changes when opportunities like this are made available to students?
I think, first of all, the hallmark of the program, from my view, is seamless right now. This flows, because we are a semi-remote community. Fort Smith is a semi-remote school that we have here. So to have we don't have the on-site tech support that we should have. You just don't have that. But the way that Connected North is been created is it to be plug and play. You plug it in, you play, and you have this nice, beautiful screen that the kids can get interactive with. I think as a teacher, I moved from a sole lecturer to a co-facilitator. And I managed the more of the physical classroom, handling out supplies like beanie kits or science specimens, or while a remote expert leads the instruction on a high-definition screen. That's pretty cool for me because as a teacher, I have that support, which is important for the kids. So the students just don't listen. They ask questions in real time, which is very, very important in any school. A student in Fort Smith can show their artwork to professional Indigenous artists right on the screen in Toronto or wherever they're from, and receive immediate personalized feedback, which is important to the kids. And this also increases student engagement. I think it's important to have that engagement because the novelty of a virtual field trip or a guest speaker often acts as a powerful hook, which is important. Leads to higher attendance on session days, especially. Students may struggle with traditional textbooks learning. Often they thrive in high energy virtual environments that we've created here. That's what I've noticed with the kids that are involved with our sessions through Connected North. But one of the most profound changes is the shift of representation. A lot of sessions are led by Indigenous role models. So students are seeing a First Nation professionals, an Inuit artist, or a Métis entrepreneur on screen. So it validates their identity and their heritage, also combats negative stereotypes, which is important. Also provides a mirror that shows that they belong in the fields of STEM, law, or the arts.
That's amazing, Paul. I think sometimes we forget how powerful people like me can be. And when students can witness role models from their own community who in real time can inspire them and provide feedback to their questions and answers and those kinds of things, but that's so amazing. So Willa, we're going to come back to, because again, this is in part, it's also understanding the construct for this. Because I mean, as you said, Connected North didn't emerge fully formed. It was shaped by early lessons about relationships and trust. And I know that here at Imagine Canada, we kind of explored those lessons more deeply in our Partnering for Impact report, which featured Connected North as a case study in why partnership-led models matter. So when you think back to the early days when you were at Cisco helping to launch this, what did you learn about credibility and community trust? And why did the model need to be partnership-led rather than corporate branded? Because I always think that's one of the unique aspects of this.
I think one of the most important foundational principles of the Connected North program is that we are here to leverage technology to serve the needs of the community. So we don't provide anything that we are not asked for. And all of the content, all of the different sessions that we have developed, we produce them in close collaboration with the communities themselves. We wouldn't succeed otherwise. There were three main challenges that the communities were facing. Poor attendance is number one that I mentioned. The need for better resources in the school is second. And then finally, the lack of qualified teachers. It's very, very difficult to support teachers in those remote northern communities. You know, first of all, the funding levels in those schools is 30% less than it is for provincially managed and supported schools. So they're dealing with a whole lot of challenges. And, you know, the most important thing, though, I think the key principle that binds all of us is that we all want to see better outcomes for those kids. You know, I always remember Paul talking to me when we visited him in his school about his hope for the next generation. And he was such a wonderful supporter of Connected North because he knew that we had the ability to bring specific resources that weren't available locally. So what it means is that we go to those schools. We sit down with the teachers. We sit down with the students. We sit in on the sessions. We figure out what resonates. We figure out what a need is. If they want language revitalization, you know, we help support that. We help identify content providers. We're constantly on the look, as Paul said, for Indigenous artists and storytellers and leaders and executives. And, you know, we had the head of the Canadian Medical Association, for example, from Saskatchewan, a wonderful Indigenous leader. He spoke to some of our schools. So, you know, these are extraordinary opportunities, not only for student engagement, but also to make sure that those students have pride in what they're learning. You know, the Indigenous population in Canada, it's 1.8 million people. It's 5% of our population, and it is the fastest growing population in the country. It's growing at 9.4%, so double that of our national population. And if we want to tap into the talent and the resources and the potential of these students, we need to listen. We need to listen to what's needed because only they know what is going to make them successful. We don't. But we have an ability at Connected North to help identify those resources and present those resources to these schools and say, look, is this something that will work? And then we have continuous feedback from teachers like Paul, all of our teachers, all of our communities, all of our educational health authorities to tell us whether or not we're on track or we're off track. And the beauty of technology is that you can adjust really quickly. You can adjust on the fly. And, and you asked me about those early days at Cisco. We were taking continuous feedback after every single session. And unlike Southern school boards, where there's a little bit more bureaucracy and, a little bit more red tape, we were able to sort of experiment and push the envelope and sort of take the lead of our Indigenous partners and try new things. And I'm so proud to say that in 14 years of operations, not a single school has dropped out, not one. And, 96% of our teachers say that Connected North sessions help to engage their students and contributes to their success. And another 93% of teachers agree that the program affirms students' identities. And for us, that is what matters. Because if these kids feel valued, feel excited about their potential and what they're learning, then we're going to increase those graduation rates.
And that's a really nice segue into the next question, which, you talked about from your perspective, some of those indicators of what success looks like. So Paul, what about your vantage point? When you think about success for a program or an initiative like Connected North, what are you paying attention to? What do you think are those indicators of success?
From my perspective, from my classroom, so I'm going to look at from my classroom, a semi-remote northern high school, and access to a program like Connected North feels like an educational software. It's more like a high-definition window to the world. That's the way I look at it. It is designed to be immersive, way intensive personal connection with students. And I think that's very, very, very important. Using high-definition telepresence that is important to the North. To me, telepresence is very important to the North because it's one way to connect to the rest of the world that we don't have. And this really explores a lot more than we could think. You can see and hear the students as clearly as if that presenter is in the room, which is really good because it's live conversations as we have. And I think that's important. And like I said, the hallmark of the program is that it isn't just digital. If my classroom is doing a session on traditional activities, or art, Connected North actually ships all the physical kits to us, which is very important because then the kids see different art forms from different areas, which then ignites their identity, which is important. Then they know that they're connected to the rest of the world. And the expert leads, the classroom through kind of physical activity in real time. This is something that through Connected North, we've been able to do. So as a language and cultural teacher, I don't take what is given. I ask through email what is available in subject areas. I ask students what interests from that information I get from Connected North. This empowers me to hook disengaged students. It gives me a to topics that they may be of interest of. Indigenous art. Our hoop dancer, Lawrence, was awesome, really connected with the kids. We had to bring him back again. We brought him back about 3-4 times. The kids really connected with him. And I think that's important, is that connection.
Well, it's amazing because what you're talking about is true community-driven partnerships here. Like if kids in your classroom are the creators of the topics that you want to investigate together, like that's just a wonderful way of building the program. And I do want to note for some folks, the word telepresence has been used a few times. I've had the good fortune of experiencing the telepresence system. And if you think about the fact that most people now are using Zoom or Google Meets or Teams, the huge difference with telepresence is that you're essentially looking at a life-size person. We're used to now looking at these little boxes on a screen. But when you're having a telepresence experience, it's almost as though the end of your table is here and the beginning of their table is there, and they're sitting across the table at the same size. It's a really different visual, interactive, digital experience. And so, Paul, I'm going to stay with you for this next question. And you've sort of touched a little bit about it in your role as a language and cultural specialist at the high school and a knowledge and language keeper. So what does a good partnership look like? For many organizations, Asians who are seeking to engage with Northern communities, they might miss things in terms of understanding what a good partnership is. So from your perspective, what are those solid building blocks of a solid and strong partnership?
Well, I know that I'm semi-remote. I'm in the north. I am thousands of kilometers away from everybody. But to me, a very good partnership is based on trust. We trust Connected North to go find those resources for us. And so far, we've been very, very successful with that. But also, it must be holistic, reflective. It has to be experimental and rational, focused on connection, on partnerships, and a sense of place for the kids. They have to feel that sense of place. The understanding that we are all connected, that any work we do must honor the land, the ancestors, and future generations. I think we've been doing that. North of 60, we often say that business moves at the speed of trust. A successful partnership is with an outside organization. Typically features, to me, 4 pillars: time, clarity, humility, and stability. If we can accomplish those things, that builds a good partnership. In a living relationship that requires time, humility, and willingness to be changed by the community you are entering. Connected North has entered our community and has made a difference. That's the most important because of those 4 pillars that I mentioned.
That's terrific. And I think for organizations who are contemplating or maybe not getting traction, this idea of moving at the speed of trust is based on those 4 pillars is a path to think about in terms of working in the North. So, Willa, as Connected North has grown, maintaining accountability to communities has been essential. So how does Connected North ensure that community voices meaningfully shape the program so it stays responsive and accountable as it grows?
First of all, I want to touch on the point that Paul made about trust. And it is absolutely elemental. And we work so hard and respectfully to build that trust. And a lot of it just means going there, meeting our partners where they're at, understanding their opportunities and understanding their challenges, and knowing the students. We work very, very hard to do that. I mean, I've been to the North almost 30 times now. Actually, I'm leaving next week for the Northwest Territories, Paul. But I'll tell you a very quick story. When we first launched the program and we were in beta phase in Nunavut, we were working in the Axquarnit Middle School, and I was going up probably every 6 weeks. And, here I am, this white woman from the South, very aware of what I didn't know and very mindful of the fact that I was an outsider and I needed to learn and I needed to build that trust. And there was a little girl, she was about 10 years old, and she kept seeing me come up. And finally, on about my 3rd or 4th trip, she walked up to me and she said, "Who are you? Why are you coming here?" And I explained to her who I was and what I was doing. And she said, "Well, that's good, but I will tell you something. If you say you're going to do something, you come up here and you promise us something, you better do it. Because so many people come up here and they tell us they're going to do things, and then we never see them again." And for me, that was such an important lesson about going forward and just staying with it, never, ever giving up, and continuing to build those partnerships. And I've been at this now for 14 years. And, when you're working in education, whether or not it's in the North or it's in the South, change can be slow. And I remember saying to the people at Cisco, and I say this all the time at Connected North too, we've got a long time horizon here, 10, 20, 30 years. Some of the challenges in the North, it took generations to create, reveal themselves. It's not going to be solved overnight. So I think taking that long-term view, I think is elemental. And in terms of accountability, continuous feedback, continually providing results, staying close to teachers. After we run a session, we have a feedback tool that immediately triggers. If our results fall below a 4 out of 5, we want to know why. Was it because the presenter wasn't well equipped or didn't understand the dynamics of the classroom? Was it because the content wasn't relevant? How can we fix that? What did we miss? What did we overlook? And knock on wood, I'm happy to say we haven't come across any significant issues because we take every single session seriously. And we work very hard to achieve a level of quality that sort of helps us demonstrate that we're focused on delivering the best possible product and outcome in our communities. And, and over time, we've built that reputation, and that reputation means everything to us. And we safeguard it. And so our accountability is really, I think, in the results. Again, it doesn't stop. It's an ongoing effort, but it's fundamental to what we do.
Well, and it's great to hear because, we live in this fast-paced, soundbite, move on to the next thing kind of world today. And the fact that at the core and the essence of this program is staying power, we know that investment in young people is not 30 seconds or a day. It takes time to really ensure that this is, in fact, making a difference for the lives of young people. And so with that, Paul, I was wondering if you could maybe share an example of a Connected North session or experience that really resonated with students. I know you've already talked about one example with hoop dancing. I don't know if there's any others, but one that is maybe especially related to land-based learning, culture, or identity. And from your perspective, how does a program like this make it usable and sustainable in the classroom?
Well, I think it's a pleasure to speak to this from the heart of the classroom. When we talk about land-based learning or identity, we aren't just talking about subjects. We are talking about the survival of our spirit and our way of life. Lawrence had a big impact on some of the students because some of our Cree students have not ever been to a powwow. And this really enlightened them to say, I want to go to a powwow and watch this guy dance in real life. A lot of the sessions that we do helps us with other subject areas that we're covering. The skills that they're learning from these sessions is carried on to other sessions. So for Lawrence to show us that, hey, he really enjoys hoop dancing and has been doing it for 30, 40 years, well, that energy then is brought to the kids and said, hey, now I want to go see a real powwow. So we look forward to going to a powwow now. But also, I think, is it important to look at, there has to be a shift change. I look at the pedagogy of resilience, I always say to myself, because we can't look at damage-centered ideas, because when I was in residential school, I was forbidden to speak my language or even to practice some of my own cultural ways. But a resilience-centered, despite the ban, many students were whispering their language or practicing their culture in a secret way. And those are the things that I want to celebrate now, because I don't have to celebrate what has been damaged, but now I could celebrate what we've done to preserve what we have. And I think Connected North has connected to that and helped us to speed that process up, because building the students' identities, it's a huge undertaking. It's a big, big job, We always say it takes 7 generations, but we're trying to do it in 2. By accelerating what we're doing, I think is very, very important, because it gives us an opportunity to watch these kids transform and to grow, to be good citizens. I think that's important.
And it's interesting as you think about the journey of our country through truth and reconciliation, the acknowledgement of what has happened, and actions of reconciliation. The idea, as you've stated, Paul, that young people today can have a joyful public expression of their language and culture rather than having to whisper it and not get caught, hopefully is part of that journey, real concrete steps and actions towards true reconciliation in this country. So we're going to end with the last question. And Will, I'm going to come to you first, then Paul, I want to give you the last word. We always close off the Let's Imagine podcast with a question about hope. So what gives you hope for the future of equitable education access in the North? And from your perspectives, what would meaningful progress look like over the next few years? So Willa, to you first.
So I'll go back to the founding of Connected North and the first time I visited some communities and was very surprised at the lack of technology in these schools. And it sort of struck me. I remember going back and saying, there's a role here for the corporate sector to step up and address a social issue in a very profound way. And, I saw a real gap. And if you think about the way that a lot of our social challenges are addressed through the charitable sector, we're in this sort of knee jerk of identify the program, write the grant, submit the grant, get the funding, go 2 years, show the results, and then reapply for another grant. And what was different about Connected North is we focused on one key issue, challenge, opportunity, which really was, at the end of the day, trying to engage students to increase graduation rates in the North. And by focusing on that goal, you in turn are sort of building that labor force development. And with all of the focus now, particularly of this government, on opportunities in the North, the investments in Arctic infrastructure and critical minerals mining, and it just makes sense that we do the very best job we can to make sure that these students are given the opportunities to be successful in school and in life. And so by putting that problem at the center and bringing, corporations and governments and foundations and building this ecosystem of partners around the problem and getting everybody onto the same page, we've been able to really do something very powerful. So I have nothing but hope, actually, for the communities that I've been in. I see enormous potential in the kids, and I see more enthusiasm. And, we know anecdotally we've got higher graduation rates. It's up 10%, I think, in Nunavut. I was just reading a report the other day. So I think that's phenomenal. But in terms of the charitable sector itself, given what we're facing in this world right now, my hope is that more corporations will lean in, will look at ways that they can leverage their own resources and capabilities to be able to bring best-in-class problem solving and resources to some of the big issues that we're facing. It's not impossible. It's just sort of a different way of looking at social impact. And so those are sort of my two hopes. One is for the students, and I think we're well on our way. I think the progress has been, there's a long way to go, but I think by introducing technology into these schools and these sorts of opportunities, it's much needed. And then by taking a critical look at how we do engage governments and corporations and charities to work together, I think the shift can be fundamental.
Thanks, Willa. And Paul, how about you? What does hope look like?
Oh, there's so many perspectives about hope. And one of the things that I'm seeing, there is a shift from a model of education that is historically imposed from the outside to the North. Now I see it's being reclaimed within, but with good partners. As we move into 2026, 2027, and beyond, there are several kind of concrete optimisms regarding access and Indigenous-led success. One is the rise of the homegrown curriculum. Like we have our language curriculum that we developed ourselves and using in the classroom now. I think the revitalization of training our own teachers in the North again is finally again resurrected. I think that's important. My wife and I are homegrown and educated in the North, and we are teaching now. We've been teaching for many, many, many years. But it's important that we have initiatives like the language revitalization scholarships that we have. Also, the mentor apprenticeship programs that we have now in the North are very, very important. But also, I think there has to be a policy shift now, because I see in August of 2025, the Yukon Joint Education Plan shows that governments are finally signing to legal binding declarations to share authority with First Nations. And if we could do that, then I think the buzzword, reconciliation is a structural requirement for that. And I think hopefully this happens in the North and happens within our school, and we move forward. Before, I used to watch the students when they made stuff in my classroom. They made a drum or they made moccasins or they made cement. They would hide them. But today, about 3 months ago, in November, I seen 3 of my kids that made drums. They were so happy they walked down the hall and they're telling their friends, hey, look what I made. And they were all drumming together. Now that's the shift that I'm talking about, that they are proud of their identity. And I think that gives me hope that we continue to do that, to watch them do that and to grow. It's just amazing.
What a wonderful way to end off. So, Paul and Willa, thank you for sharing your perspectives and for the work that you're doing to build real respectful partnerships that expand learning opportunities for students in northern communities. And we'll look to stay in touch on this, because this is clearly something that has been built over time that does have staying power and is impacting the lives of kids in the classroom. Thanks for listening to the Let's Imagine podcast. For full show notes and to subscribe to our newsletter so you never miss an episode, please visit our website, www.imaginecanada.ca. Also, if you really like this episode, we invite you to leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast, as this helps other people discover us and engage in these conversations. And again, thanks to our sponsor, Carter's Professional Corporation, for supporting our podcast.